Dominique Sanchez. I decided to do my research project over the recent government shutdown. I've had several friends and family affected by it, more than I was affected by it. And so I was just really interested in researching how it affected our economy as a whole, because I saw how it affected certain individuals in my life. For example, my brother is a federal agent, and I got to see firsthand exactly what a government shutdown does. So like I said, I thought it would be really interesting to see how it affects other people that maybe are in a different position than him, or I know that he was forced to work without being paid, and I know that there are people who don't have to show up to work, or they just don't show up to work, which is totally reasonable. That wasn't to be degrading in any way to them. It's just it affects people differently, and that's why I thought it would be a really interesting project to research how it affects our nation as a whole. So one of the most obvious ways it affects the entire nation is economically, of course. Most of the articles that I've read define a government shutdown as like a speed bump, and it just kind of messes things up for a while, and you kind of don't know when everything's going to be back to normal, and that's why they call it a speed bump. So obviously, whether you're at work or or federal agents, whether they're at work or whether they're at home, they're not getting paid. So a big way that affects our economy is that consumer spending is responsible for about 70% of our nation's economic activity. So you may know a couple of employees that work for the government, but when you add it up and you take all those couple of employees that everyone knows, it turns out to be a huge number. Over 60,000 households work for or have someone that lives there that works for the federal government. And then on an even bigger scheme of things, over 900,000 households have someone who work for their state government. So it may not sound like a huge number of government employees, but there are so many. And so this speed bump in the economy can cause a lot of short-term effects. This last government shutdown that we had, there was an immediate 10% decline in consumer spending. So that adds up quick, and obviously that's a short-term effect. You can see how it affects us right away. Pretty much though, the long-term effects take a while to see. We're still seeing some of the effects that were caused by the government shutdown at the beginning of the year. And typically what happens is the longer the shutdown, the worse the effects are going to be. So this was the longest government shutdown ever recorded in history. So we're still looking for those long-term effects, and if there is another government shutdown, then this past one will be a really good reference to see how we were affected and how people responded to the length of time that the government was shut down for. And that's where it comes into an interdisciplinary topic, because it involves political science as well, which involves history. A lot of the time in political science classes, you research and read about what happened in the past to better understand what's happening in the future. And if you can use solutions from the past on those present problems. And so that's a really important aspect of this research topic, because we have to look at previous shutdowns to kind of see what we're up against. And I know that this last shutdown, like I said, that happened at the beginning of the year, is going to be one that we look at for a long, long time. As political scientists, it will be heavily dissected, and whether you're on the Republican side or the Democratic side, political scientists' job is not to pick, it's to analyze both sides and try to find a solution, not maybe towards the left or towards the right, but just factual solutions that will work for both sides, because that's what we've had to do in the past. I know I did some research on the European Union whenever Germany and France were at war with each other before the European Union was an actual organization, before it was even thought of. They could not find a solution. They did not want, to start a World War III, and that's what Europe was coming to. And they found the solution of the European Union. They chose one form of currency, which is the euro, and it gave the countries an incentive not to go to war with each other, because they would end up hurting their own economy. And I feel like the research that I've done, and as a political science major, I feel like the United States is going to have to come to some sort of agreement like that. I know it won't be finding one common form of currency, because we already have that, but we can take what we learned from the European people as they formed the European Union and try to form our own solution to the constant fighting between the Democrats and the Republicans, so that the people don't have to suffer another 2-month government shutdown. I mean, that's where, like I said, the fusion of different perspectives and career fields and approaches makes this an interdisciplinary problem, and it can't be solved with just one mainstream study. I mean, if that was the case, then our government would have no conflict at all. We would have all roses and daisies. It would be totally kind of like algebra. Linear, you solve for X and that's it. That's not the case, because our government is a very complex system that requires thought processes from political science, from history, from economics, from human studies, human rights. I mean, half of the Constitution is civil rights, and who has, liberty, life, the pursuit of happiness. It's just such a complex problem that you can't look at it from just one discipline. So there are a lot of ways that different people were affected during the government shutdown. I really did research to find what exactly all is affected just by a government shutdown, no matter the length, or if it's 23 days or if it's 2 to 3 days. These agencies will be affected no matter what. And one of those is Social Security payments. Those are not guaranteed. They're not issued during a government shutdown, because the government does issue those. And a lot of the older generation is affected by this. And it's really sad, because they can't afford, a lot of them can't afford their prescription medicines, and they're forced to go to great lengths to get those when they need them. And that's a really hard thing to think about your grandparents. They don't have their medicine because of the government shutdown. That's kind of a ridiculous consequence. In my opinion, I feel like that's a very ridiculous consequence. Another thing that gets affected is people traveling abroad. So during the last government shutdown in 2013, 200,000 passport applications went unprocessed. So if you were going somewhere and waiting for your passport to get processed and sent back to you, that didn't happen. So that kind of affects people. It doesn't affect our economy as much as if people couldn't travel here, but that can be affected too. During this last government shutdown, I remember seeing people on the news that couldn't go to the museums, couldn't go to national parks, and it kind of put a stump on people's trips. It didn't affect us greatly economically because they were already here. They had already spent money on hotels and just food and stuff that benefited our economy. But I'm sure people will check now what is going on in our government before they come over here, because you obviously don't want to come to a foreign country and then not be able to see anything that you wanted to see. So that's something that people may learn from in the future. And that's a totally different discipline. That's tourism, that's restaurant, hotel, and institutional management. And you wouldn't even realize that that would be affected in a government shutdown. But like I said, it's such a big, complex problem with different perspectives from everywhere that it is a problem that would be affected. And then one big thing that's also affected is the federal judiciary. So that includes your court system, your judges, everything like that. If you have a trial coming up, it's most likely not going to happen. They use their funds until they run out to try to keep those agencies running, but that kind of stuff is expensive and you run out quickly. I know someone firsthand who was involved in a trial and it got pushed back. It got pushed back several months just for a cushion so that it wasn't pushed back again, if that makes sense. They pushed it back way until the summer just to be sure that the government shutdown would be done by the time that it got to the trial. And then one thing that I discovered that I really did not think would be affected by the government shutdown is loan applications. So if you are in the middle of buying a house, while there's a government shutdown, that process is going to be paused because loan applications go through the government. They're from the government. Loans are frozen because the Federal Housing Administration doesn't always have congressional appropriation. So yeah, most likely if you're in the middle of buying a house, that is going to be put on a halt because you won't be able to get the loan approved. And there's just so many more details that go into that aren't going to get done because the government isn't there to get them done. So in conclusion, I found so many things that were affected by a government shutdown, no matter the length of it, no matter if it was the Democrats' fault or the Republicans' fault or who was the president, whether it was Obama or President Trump or anything like that. These are the set agencies that will be affected and that affect people no matter the situation, like I said. So I thought it was really interesting. More things that will be affected are our health services. The CDC is run by the government, so we are not able. The CDC stands for the Center of Disease Control. And so that is not up and running while there's a government shutdown, which is kind of scary. It sounds very apocalyptic to me. And then another thing that is affected during a shutdown, which is related to health services, is Medicare and Veterans Affairs care. So this is just the Department of Health and Human Services. They're not up and running during a government shutdown. And so just so many things that are affected by the government shutdown that you would not think would be affected, and that directly affect us and affect our family members and our friends. And it's just really interesting to see all of the patterns that are in each government shutdown, no matter the situation, the president, the public officers that are in Congress at the moment. And so I hope that as interdisciplinarians, we can take these different perspectives and prevent such a long shutdown in the future, and just kind of look at the bigger picture and use, like I said, our different perspectives and our different threads of knowledge that we've learned through different life experiences, and look at how this affects everyone at an economic level, but as well as a health services level and a real estate level with the loan applications, and a criminal justice level with the federal judiciary, and the restaurant, hotel, and institutional management perspective with the tourism, and the effect on studying abroad. And so I thought this was a really interesting topic to take all these different perspectives and put them together and see how they affect all of us as Americans.